UK Cinema History, This Sporting Life 1964, director Lindsay Anderson with Yassi, Soufi, and Sila Blume. All right, this is UK Cinema History. We're covering This Sporting Life 1963, director Lindsay Anderson. I'm just waiting for my co-host, Yassi, and we'll begin. In the meantime, someone left a cake out in the rain. I don't think that I can take it, 'cause it took so long to bake it, and I'll never have that recipe again. No, no. That was, of course, MacArthur Park, made famous by the star of today's film, Mr. Richard Harris. Hello, Yassi. And welcome to UK Cinema History. How was your Thanksgiving?
Perfect. How was yours?
Still stuffed, so very good.
Okay. Great.
I had ham instead of turkey this year, so.
Okay. Everything is acceptable.
Yes.
So I'm so sorry about last week. It was horrible. I mean, I couldn't even sit up in the bed. It was awful. So I'm sorry.
Well,
I must have come this week more prepared. But these movies that you keep putting me through are so deep, and the layers, Eric, the layers, they're killing me. How deep these movies go.
Well, next week we'll give you a break, because we're going to do Oppenheimer by Mr. Christopher Nolan, which not as deep, layered, but not as deep. So Oppenheimer will be quite a bit. I consider Christopher Nolan the same way I consider Thai food. At first, I considered it not a bad way to spice up my diet, and now I just kind of consider it inflicting self harm on myself. So it'll be very interesting. There's Sila and there's Herbert. Yay! All right.
Hi, Sila. Hi, Herbert. Happy Thanksgiving.
Everyone. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you all.
Let me get some admin designations out, so we can all do crowd control, just in case
Thank you.
someone attempts to. I was jamming out to Tina Turner in Sila's room this morning. It was a great way to spend my. I had some paperwork I had to do. It was a great way to spend the morning, Sila. Good to see you. Good to see you too, Herbert.
Good afternoon to everyone. Yes, I don't promote music like that too much. I cannot, but once in a while, I really wanted to show my respect for her work. So
it is simply the best, better than all the rest, I would say. That's not even going to be my worst joke of the day. Just
I know,
so you
I know.
Not even close.
But I wanted to show my respect by not laughing.
Just get used to it. Just get used to it. So, Herbert, I do know that Sila has seen the film. Have you seen the film yet?
No, I forgot all about this. I did see the movie I think you covered last week called If by Lindsay Anderson, but that was like 50 years ago I saw it. Just remember some guys riding around in a vehicle and with guns, and they were supposed to be students in an English boarding school or something.
Yep, you got that movie down pat. Well, this actually was an insistence, at the insistence of Yassi, that we cover this one, because she fell in love with If so much she wanted to do something more about Lindsay Anderson, who, as we're going to talk about, was one of the founding members of what was called the free cinema movement in Britain. And I was looking at his career, and he really didn't make that many films. He made this was his first feature film, If. Then he made 2 sequels to If, Oh Lucky Man, and Britannia Hospital, where a character named Mick Travers was played by Malcolm McDowell, although he wasn't the exact same character, which are extraordinarily well directed, but not very good. So this was the next choice. But I think it's not only one of the best films that he made of that short career. I think it's one of the best films of that particular genre and of the 1960s in England. And we'll go on to discuss this. But I'm just going to do a little background on what how I came to this film, and then we're gonna do Sila's reaction, and then Yassi's, and then we'll go into the history of things like free cinema and the so-called kitchen sink drama, which this is so much a part of. But I first came to this film when I were but a wee lad of 15, and I had just discovered international cinema, and this was the first time I watched a film in English that I thought visually and emotionally could compare with the things I was seeing out of France, Sweden with the Ingmar Bergman, Mexico with the Luis Buñuel, and the Italian neorealists and whatever the hell Fellini you call Fellini and Antonioni's 1960s work. This was the first time I was like, oh, so there were English language directors working in the same vein too, and I wanted to dig very, very deep into this particular genre, and I went and I got the original novel by David Story, who also wrote the screenplay, and read as much David Story as I possibly could. And the 2 things I wanted to see most were the other 2 adaptations of David Story novels by free cinema directors, which were Tony Richardson's version of Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, and Carl Rise, the producer of this film, had directed Albert Finney in a very successful, financially successful adaptation of Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, but they were not available on video at that time. So I owned a copy of this. So this would have been 1985, and this for many, many years was it for me out of that, along with The Entertainer, Tony Richardson's adaptation of the John Osborne play with Laurence Olivier, and John Osborne and Tony Richardson's Tom Jones, which is not by any stretch of the imagination a kitchen sink drama, as it is a comedy that was based on a Thackeray novel, but was extremely popular. But that was all I had out of it, because none of the other films in this genre were available. You couldn't see them until around the late 1990s, when I finally got to see Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner and Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, and I was quite lucky, because this is actually the best of the 3, despite the other 2 kind of having more cachet to them historically and being remembered better. Obviously, Saturday Night and Sunday Morning is considered a classic because of Albert Finney's performance. For reasons that, when we get back around to me, I'll discuss. This is, I think, par excellence of that movement. So I mean, that was my personal history with the film. So I've had since 1985 with this film. Warning, the episode might go a little long. I'm gonna go to Scylla, who you watched this about 3 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, for the first time.
That is correct, and I almost watched it completely yesterday again.
This is not one of those films that I think of when I think of I need to watch it again, but I have seen it several times. But it is a bit depressing, whereas If, it seems to me more like has a more of a rewatchability factor to it. But what were your reflections on the film, Scylla?
Well, for me, when you make that comparison, I don't find anything tragic in If. Is To me, it's just a study, a political study, a generational study, protest, young people and against tradition and all kinds. But um, well, the sporting life, especially in the main character as well as the lady, those two characters are, in my view, extremely depressing. He is a little boy, in my view. He's very much a little boy, but a very dedicated, immature boy who is just very dedicated to this woman and her kids in his mind, in his potency of being a human being. He's really, really, the way I read it, especially seeing it the second time, I feel he was really, in a very immature way, but very sincere way, he was doing his best for his time to and I think he was quite smart, seeing certain things about how she's not smiling, not about her face, but he understood her situation quite well, and he was trying to do his best to give her what she could, what he can. She, on the other hand, makes many, gives many signs of how she might, even at the beginning, how she might be interested, but please, give me time. So for me, that's a very depressing situation. Also, his dedication when it comes to, I can't remember the name of the woman whom I find quite attractive as well, the wife of the money guy. Gottsell, I think is the name of the actress.
Anne Weaver was the character, and the actress was Vanda Godso.
Gottsell,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Even with her, the way he says no, no. And even with the sport, and with many things, he seemed to me like a very primitive but intelligent soul, not man, but soul, who is really investing all he can in his simple way, but investing everything he can and enjoying this little newspaper article or portion of an article. He's a very, very primitive mind, but a very determined soul, and I got to really like him a lot
Well,
because I thought
let's
he was.
just because Herbert hasn't seen the film,
Oh, okay, okay.
let's put him into context. That he is his name is Frank Machen, and he is a rugby player who gets himself on the rugby squad, and that the film takes place in northern England in a fictional Yorkshire town. It was filmed in Wakefield, and the author of the novel and the screenplay, David Story, was actually he worked his way through art school playing as a rugby player for Wakefield, and so a lot of these are his reflections from actually having played on that. Just now that we've got it just in that context, because when we start talking in terms of the plot, we just needed to kind of set the place. Sorry, back to you, Scylla.
No, I guess that's pretty much what I would say to begin with. I didn't see it until the end yesterday. I didn't get a chance to. I've been working. I'm still at work today, so I haven't had much time the last few days working retail. But I really like the dynamic, the simplicity. I don't see any experimental sides of it. To me, the film is very simple, but I think when it comes to him, it's an analysis of his character, which I liked. You know, the brutality with which he plays the game, the determination with which he says he will not go down from 1,000 pounds. There are many details about him that I really like the way he does it his way, and I wanted to see it a second time because I think the development of the relationship is quite complex, and also the fact that she ends up dying, and I don't. To me, it's not clear if she kills herself. I mean, it's very. It gets a little.
It's a brain hemorrhage, and
Yes. Oh, okay.
it is one of the flaws of the film that is dropped as a hint at the very beginning of the film,
Yes,
where
but he keeps it confusing
yeah.
because they add a little bit of surrealism with the spider. I mean, I found, and that's why I wanted to see it a second or a third time.
Yeah, it is a flaw of the film, but then the film is also 2 hours and 14 minutes, so I guess they had to cut something out. But there's a long flashback. She has a history of brain hemorrhages that isn't
Boys,
developed. Uh,
boys, calm down. I have the explanation for all your questions now that we get here. No, for real. That spider at the end, that kind of explained the whole movie to me.
that was one of the scenes where I was saying this is something I would compare to like a Bergman film. I was when I was 15 and first
Yes,
saw this.
only in that aspect, yes.
Oh, it
Uh,
was so Bergman, so like psychology, all the it goes like so how he, I mean, okay, I told you, Eric, that what I like about this film was how, like many other sports movies, mm, they use this vehicle of sports to speak to bigger and broader audiences when they're telling a story, especially when they're touching these, like talking about the psychology of men, the relationship between men and women, and uh, mm, here I think you, in most of the sports movies, the heart of the film is not, it's almost never sports. It's about the characters, it's about the development of the characters, and especially about men, and where they use this very masculine aspect of the physics and the power seeking, and the way this movie goes chose this narrative form of using the dream to go, to make Frank find his truth through his unconscious, and like with using all these tiny symbols, and what I really liked was the pace of the film. The editing was brilliant, and the movie, yeah, I totally understand when you say it's not an easy film to come back to, because it's very bleak and brutal, and especially the beginning, like right at the beginning, it hits you with that quick, intensive rugby game, and then like they knock his teeth out and all the blood comes out. You feel like you're entering this very masculine, scary, violent world. But then it enters his subconscious, uh, when he's under anesthesia in a dentist's office, and then everything, the rhythm of the film changes, and everything, that the use of voyeurism, the way that he looks at everything, and Richard Harris's acting. Oh man, his eyes, his face. You see every muscle in this man's face. And I think it's so important that we mentioned that Lindsay Anderson, when these men, when Malcolm McDowell were working for him, when was working for him, when Richard Harris was working with them, they were newcomers. They were new artists. They weren't the artists that we know today. These men, this filmmaker, built these men, these actors, I believe. Because if this is if these are your first acting careers, you're either, I mean, that period of time gave the cinema a very like amazing, stunning actors, or this filmmaker knew how to mold these actors. And I think that was it, because with Rachel Roberts, he does the same thing. How she
Well, I just to just to correct real
Please.
quick, Harris and Roberts had both had careers before this. I mean, and Harris had actually acted with Brando before this in The Mutiny on the Bounty, and Rachel Roberts the year before was in Carl Rice's adaptation of Saturday Night Sunday Morning. But these were people who were established more in the theater than in film when they came to work with Anderson.
And they got the international attention, the Oscar nominations, the BAFTA wins, the Globe wins. That Lindsay Anderson pushed them through the international scene of cinema,
because
right?
nobody knew they were capable of giving these kind of performances until then, I think. And yeah, I think of this the same way. I think that James Dean had already made Rebel Without a Cause, but it really wasn't until he had a director like Elie Kazan for East of Eden, who could center a film around him the way that Anderson centers the film around Harris, and make the camera and the audience fall in love with him, despite the fact that he is playing, rather an odious person, in both cases. And I'd like to talk about Harris as Manchin, and Yassi. This is something that I think you're the perfect person to take us through because of your particular knowledge of film. But take us through Manchin, Frank Manchin, through, say, Travis Bickle, Jake LaMotta, Rocky Balboa, that because one of the people who saw this film in 1963 and was blown away by it was a young man by the name of Martin Scorsese. And when he was making Raging Bull, he cited it and Life and Death of Colonel Blimp as having inspired his vision of De Niro's performance in as Jake LaMotta. But take us through that, would you?
Okay. No, first of all, when you say like a streetcar named Desire, Elia Kazan, when I was watching the film, I was thinking, David's story. I mean, Tennessee Williams could simply write this movie. The script of this movie could simply be David's story, because of all these, this subtle class distinctions, this transgressive, dysfunctional relationships, and everything. And as you said, Richard Harris is totally Brando. You can see it. You can totally see it. And in all these movies, and I told you, it reminded me so much also of wrestler. Uh, Darren Aronofsky's Wrestler. All these dysfunctional men, these, we can't say they are this complex relationship between professional sports and masculinity and the role they're playing in society, and how they're unable sometimes to separate this ego, this persona of their sports life, as like the title of this film, of this sporting life, and and their relationship. Just like If, what happened in If, we saw a small society of men. You were saying, like you and Sila said the other week, that it's inevitable. This, like this homosexuality that we see is because of this environment, and I think this also portrays here in this film as in sports. You know, I didn't know. I like when we were talking about If, I didn't know that, but I read about Anderson more, and I found out that he was a suppressed homosexual also. But I don't see him portraying these men as suppressed characters. I see him, like the way he depicts men, is just like ancient Greece, the statues. There is this appreciation for male figure, for the beauty and the how, I mean, this, the the physics. That's how I see it. And in this film I saw something else. I know your question was something else. I'm just like getting away from it. But the other thing that I found really interesting in this sporting life was, also we see it in Raging Bull, we see it in Wrestler, this, how this physics, this body, when your this beautiful physique and body started to like disappoint you of sort. They We see it perfectly in Raging Bull, and how in Wrestler we see the Mickey Rourke character, like how the way that he, like, he used the stand, the medicine he used, everything. It kind of like put all these toxics in his body just to keep it working. And here we saw, like, and how I think that this kind of like dysfunctional, empty promise of sports, that you think that this is kind of like very healthy uh, society, the healthy, and all these, just like in If, you think that your kids are at school, but then there is this layer of dysfunctionality, corruption beneath it. In both films, we see that second subtle layer so perfectly, and through the main protagonists, the main characters, and how, like, the failure of society, the failure of the system, what it does to these male, like very strong men. We can say, like, Malcolm McDowell, I said it, like, when we were talking about If, when he enters the school with his look and his mustache and everything, he has his presence, he has this beauty, and then how it breaks it, the system broke him down. It happened also here. Like, we see how when Frank looked in the mirror, look at himself, and so, like, without the teeth and everything, and that moment that he figured that that's not that this is the fake power. That's not what he wanted. He wants that woman. But what happened to these characters, this the psychology of these men, that I think, and I talk too much, I'm going to stop here, but we go through it later, is that why, what happened? Because we see in both films that how these men fall. And I think that's so important. And the pace that is used in these films, the way that Lindsay Anderson depicts this characters, the psychology of these men after war, even years after war, but still war is present in their life. The struggles, they can't adopt with this modern society, with the kind of like sort of capitalism of sort. They want to make money, they want to have names, they want to have personality, but what what society dictate them to be, it's all this kind of struggle, this contrast between inside and out. I think Lindsay Anderson knows that very well because of who he was. And specifically in this film, I think what Eric, you can tell us more about David Shore, because this is actually David Story's story. And I think that the collaboration between these two, a man from like two men from different part of society colliding and creating this frank character. I think that's very fascinating. So I think it's so important to know more about David's story and about him.
Silence.
I talked too much. Everyone ran
I'm
away.
struggling with my microphone. Hang on, I'm going to change microphones.
But Eric, you put the article from the review, Pauline Kael's review. I think she's the only one in the world that didn't like this film. Why you put that there? That's my question. That's a very interesting choice to put
We
there.
are going to be discussing what Pauline Kael is discussing in that article, and I wanted to have a broader context so that people could watch. But hang on a moment, I'm changing microphones. I am having technical issues, as always, because this is Clubhouse, and that's what we do. Welcome to the
Hi,
stage.
Pejman.
Welcome to the
Hi,
stage.
Yassi. Hi, Yassi. Hi, Eric. Hi, Helberg and Sila. Thank you for having me here. Special thank you, Yassi, for pinging me here. But I thought your room will start for in morning from myself. It's my mistake, but my speaking. I guess you know I'm in the process of learning English, and my speaking is very weak. And I have no enough self-esteem to speak English. I think it's not the I think it's not the time to speak yet. So
That's fine. We just appreciate you being here. Can everyone hear me on my new microphone?
thank you. I'm listening.
Yes.
I can hear you.
That's good. Okay. What would a clubhouse room be without a technical problem? Okay, so in answer to Yazi's first question, the Pauline Kael article is Are Movies Going to Pieces? I'm going to quote a couple of sections from it because the structure of this film also leads into Yassi's second question about David's story and uh, and the writing of this film. So this is a quote from Pauline Kyle. Well, actually, it's a pair of quotes that I've matched up from different parts in the article, because the article covers several films from 1960 from the early 1960s. It was written in 1963, the same year the film came out. The technique in which a movie like This Sporting Life makes a simple, though psychologically confused story look complex and modern because it is inexplicable, isn't gracefully fragmented, it's smashed. The chunks are so heavy and humorless then, and in an odd way disturbing, that we can tell the film is meant to be bold and powerful and tragic. And basically what she's saying here is that the flashback structure that this film used is imposed on the film to give it fake depth. And we're going to have a roundhouse conversation, but I'm a person who normally says that if you can tell a story linearly in film, that's the best way to go about it. Unless you're, what I forget who it was, but unless you're as clever as Woody Allen, tell Annie Hall from I Met Annie Hall in the first scene to We Broke Up in the last. But in this particular author's experience, the flashback is a very important part of what story does. In his previous screenplay that he wrote for Tony Richardson's Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner, which I don't think is as good a film as this, but I do think is a great film and a historically important film. But I don't think it is directed as well. I don't think Anderson is a better director than Richardson, than Tony Richardson on the whole. But I do think that that Anderson's use of the flashback structure is better, not from the screenwriting point of view, but from the directorial point of view. And so, for instance, the film begins with Frank's losing his front teeth in the rugby match, and the flashback structure, when we can go back and forth between his getting dental surgery, etc., and going to the party, the way we can tell the difference between the flashback and the modern day without having to have it set up with a lot of who dreamy blah blah blah, is that he has a mouthful of teeth in the flashbacks and he doesn't in the present day. And I think this is an excellent structure for the film. Whereas in The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, the flashbacks just kind of come at you. But they're both serving the same purpose, which is to give us a dossier on these characters without taking us through a bunch of people that we don't care about yet and making us care about them. That is to say, in the beginning of the film, we see Frank engaged in this violent sport of rugby and experience just that huge shock. So we are immediately on his side because we've just seen him get his teeth knocked out. And in the flashbacks, we're not going to be on his side because more and more throughout them, we see him as he describes himself, a big ape who may be only good for playing rugby. And this is and it's in these flashbacks that you get the homosexual subtext of the film through the character of Dad, who story based on several people like this who hang around rugby teams, recruiting players for the rugby. They're unpaid, just like Dad is, and there is an unsaid but not subtle subtext that Dad has just this incredible crush on Frank, on Richard Harris, and who wouldn't, especially the way that Lindsay Anderson is filming through these, because the camera absolutely just loves Richard Harris in these scenes. And at a certain point, it actually gets said by Margaret, the Rachel Roberts character, that that dad looks at you like a girl. And this again was based on Story's own experience, that was who these recruiters were. That they weren't doing it for money. But they would recruit for these local rugby teams just to get into relationships with these players. But it was very much like the way Lindsay Anderson in his diaries described his celibate homosexuality, that it was something he could never act on. And so he would constantly find himself falling in love with people who he knew were out of reach, which would be the movie stars of these films. So the entire time he was making this, he was in love with Richard Harris. The entire time he was making the Mick Travers films, he was in love with Malcolm McDowell. When he was working on the stage with Alan Bates, the same thing. And you can see that love come through in the way that he films these flashbacks, but while the camera is adoring him, he is acting as a brute. And I don't see another way to tell this story that way and keep it interesting and keep it under 2 hours and 15 minutes. But I'm going to do a once around. Do you think the flashback structure helps or hurts this film? I'm going to start with Sila and then go to Yassi. Sila?
Let's see who's here.
Okay, Yassi?
I hear something coming.
I think the way that he uses, the flashback as through this dream, I found it really interesting. And I don't think that it's a scam. I think that's a very interesting choice because of the way this, like, Frank kind of rediscovers himself, as in a very Jungian way, uh, if I may say. I think it's how can I say, like, mm, that we see this movie, this aspect, like dreamlike aspects, we kind of interpret this dream through his mind, through, and using the flashback.
We learn
you
about him
know
in pieces. We learn about him in pieces this way. We
and in
learn
the
about
and his, yeah, and it's very kind of genuine, honest, because this is, I think, he is, in this case, he is a very reliable narrator because we see his dream so vividly, and putting flashbacks through his dream is so important and so artistically and so beautifully set, kind of poetic for this movie, for this violent, brutal film. This is a very artistic touch that Anderson gave the film, I think, to me.
but
Going through his
it
trauma, this rediscovering his trauma in his mind, in his, like, deep psyche. That's so nice, so very, like, and I think flashback telling, like, telling like, using flashback through a dream is so, especially for that time, is so, that's what you said, it's so Bergman. To me, that was so Bergman like,
well, Denny's Coop, who did the cinematography, he also did the cinematography for Kind of Loving, Bunny Lake is Missing, uh, what I think he's doing, because this is obviously meant to be outside of Yorkshire, despite the kind of wonky Yorkshire accents of Irish men, Richard Harris and Welsh woman Rachel Roberts, but the the landscape itself is almost dreamlike throughout it, and so he's kind of walking through this because it's this cold, nasty part of England where it rains all the time. That which if you only know about Yorkshire from the Monty Python's the Yorkshireman skit, I mean, it's not the nicest place to live, and yet it's filmed almost like a dream, And for those of you who are like, I kind of remember the Yorkshireman skit. That is the Monty. Monty Python did the redid it, but it was originally a Graham Chapman sketch with John Cleese, but that's the one where they were outdoing each other about their bad childhoods. We used to live in a tiny old tumble down house with a great big hole in the roof. Oh, you were lucky to live in a house. We had one room, all 26 of us, with no furniture. Half the floor was missed. It's that sketch, but and so and that maybe all people knew of Yorkshire until the free cinema people started filming. I'm not going to say filming there, because while yes, the exteriors and the rugby scenes were filmed at Wakefield, most of this was actually shot in London at Rank Studios, which I'm sorry. To me, that's a lost art form. The ability to rebuild an entire Yorkshire village, in a studio and make it look that real, the way it does in this film. But in terms of the cinematography and the landscape of the flashbacks, it feels distinct. And from the last third of the film, which is filmed much more naturalistically. Now we still have Lindsay Anderson's use of the high angles in order to allow us to both watch the character as an observer and also experience things as the character does. Which, from a technical standpoint, when you compare this to both Saturday Night and Sunday Morning and to Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, this just is a top-notch professional film from top to bottom. And I'm not saying that Carl Rise and Tony Richardson aren't good directors. They are very, very good directors. But talent is something that you either have or do not. And Lindsay Anderson just knew exactly how to frame a scene. And the framing of every shot in this film is just better. Now, a film like Loneliness, the Long Distance Runner, you have a lot of the director imposing himself. You have, for instance, the undercranking of the camera to speed things up, the use of Dutch angles and things like that to kind of give a slant. Whereas Lindsay Anderson has that cold, invisible hand that is just excellent all the way through this. And yet, if you were to just take the shots of this and have them as a book of shots from York, pictures from Yorkshire, this would be like a great book of photography, like an Ansel Adams in the West. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you. There are two scenes towards the end of the film when we see it's exactly the frames of Frank standing in the horizon, kind of like a lonely man in the horizon, and that he is like on the right side, and the golden point of right side of the frame, and those frames are totally like reminded me of Seventh Seal, reminded me of Antonioni. Beautiful. And that's just an empty scene. There's
the
nothing
landscape
there.
is bleak, but the shot isn't. The shot is beautiful. Just it's a beautiful shot of a beautiful man on a very bleak landscape, and the dichotomy of that is what makes this film. Like I said, when I was a young person, the first one in English that I was like, okay, this is something that can compare with European cinema, or well, including Mexico, but international cinema that in other languages.
That's so the innovation is so striking to me. I think that this, first of all, maybe for us today, this like not telling the story, not linear story, is we kind of used to it today. Like you mentioned, Christopher Nolan at the beginning.
Yeah, we're going to be
Yeah,
we're going to be discussing a lot of that next week when we get
yeah, next
when we
week.
talk about Christopher Nolan and Oppenheimer, which I'm going to come out and just spoiler alert, I did not like that film, but I think it's very important to talk about in terms of its place in UK cinema history, even though it's just now coming out from this year, because I think Nolan is getting his cues from these films, and that's something that we're going to talk about next week. But I don't think without free cinema you don't have a Christopher Nolan. Now, I did put into the comments the Free Cinema Manifesto, but let's talk about a little bit about
Please talk
what.
about the manifesto, which I really love. I really liked this particular cinematic manifesto because I said this innovations, this jumping points, this use of flashbacks, this kind of avant-garde narrations, and it was so in line with their themes, with the social commentary, with this kind of, you say that you said they're not like this thing, but I think that's in line with this character. He is not like distinct. He hasn't found himself yet. So why should the film be distinct? This it shows, just like the rugby scenes, just like in Raging Bull, just like in Wrestler, sports is is used to show this turmoil, uneased characters, shows what's going on inside them. And it's so in line with this style of filmmaking, and also with their manifesto.
Well, let's look at the manifesto. So first, it says that no film can be too personal, and basically that is going against the grain of English cinema up until this point, which was mostly your Noel Coward, Terence Rattigan adaptations uh, of plays about like This Happy Breed. The David Lean adaptation of Noel Coward is a perfect example of families in their sitting room, or the World War One. Dug into the bunker sharing tea stories that every film seemed to have to fit into this is a police narrative, such as the police dramas, or a heist film. Such as The League of Gentlemen, which was, which Basil Reardon made, I believe, the same year as this. The second, the image speaks, the sound amplifies and comments. And that is something that all of these films share in common, which is that they are telling a story visually, and the dialogue is there almost as part of the accompanying music. So when done perfectly, which this I don't think was done, it was done quite as well here as it was in If, but when done perfectly in If, you could watch If on mute and understand what was going on all the way through the film. Or if you did not understand English and watch it without subtitles, you would understand just from their intuitions, and that the dialogue and the like a musical soundtrack merely adds to that experience. Size is irrelevant. Perfection is not an aim, and so the idea of that to make a film, you had to have a large story to tell, or something important or historical, is being thrown out the window. And these small stories of people's northern lives that, up until this point, pretty much, if it didn't take place in Kent or London, it wasn't put on film. But now, with A Taste of Honey, with The Entertainer is an exception, but and Look Back in Anger is an exception, but even Room at the Top, which is not a film I particularly care for, but you are actually seeing the north of England for the first time. So at least we're not quite getting to Wales yet. We're not quite in Scotland, but we're moving our way north, and we're seeing a part of the world that you couldn't. And then the last is an attitude means a style means an attitude, and I have no idea what that means on the one hand, but on the other hand, my answer to what that means is just look at how this film cuts itself together and how every scene in this film looks, and you can't take 2 frames from this and not know right away that you're looking at a Lindsay Anderson film. So,
Question: isn't that important? I think that's important that we don't know specifically where they are. Just like If, we just know, because you can apply this school to everywhere, to any
well,
school.
we know they're in Yorkshire because nobody else talks like that. Lou, Duke. Yeah, but we know they're in Yorkshire. But but no, I think that it's a fictional town. It's not Wakefield. It's not exactly, it's a fictional town because it stands in for wherever you're watching from, in a way. But the free cinema movement actually began with documentaries. Lindsay Anderson was one of the more important critics, writing for Sequence magazine, which is a very, very influential magazine over in England. But he began right after he got out of his war service, writing for them. But it was not a very widely read one because he co-founded it with Gavin Lambert and Carl Rice, the producer of this film and the director of Saturday Night Sunday Morning. But it did get enough attention that he started writing for Sight and Sound. And in 1956, he wrote Stand Up, Stand Up for Sight and Sound, which was an article which was taking Alistair Cook to task for not being committed, when Alistair Cook had written an article also for Sight and Sound, stating that that he found it was better to stay unpolitical in art because politics are of the moment, and art should be forever. And he in between, he had actually won. Lindsay Anderson had actually won an Oscar in 1955 for a documentary he made called Thursday's Child. Well, he co-directed it with Guy Brenton, but it was about the Royal School for the Deaf in Kent, and had Richard Burton as its narrator. And it was from that documentary standpoint that the Free Cinema Manifesto evolved. And he and Carl Rice had obviously remained friends. Rice was an immigrant from Yugoslavia, and when Rice went to go work for Ford Motor Company making films for them, Anderson convinced him to convince Ford Motor Company to put the money up for some films called the Look at Britain series, which some famous names like Walter Lassley, for instance, was making films for, and Rise made a film called Mama Don't Allow, which was the first fully sound documentary film, where you have to remember that taped sound had just been discovered at the end of the war when it was found by the Americans invading Berlin, because it had been invented in Germany. And so sync sound was not something that a documentary could normally have. But Anderson himself had made O Dreamland, which was a 12-minute look at a Dreamland amusement park, also in Margate, Kent. But in 1957, for the Look at Britain series, he made a very important one called Every Day Except Christmas, and it was just a documentary about the Covent Garden fruit and flower market there, which is still there, actually. If you ever go to central London, it's cleaned up a lot since then, but you can actually go to all the places in the documentary. Which Rise actually had produced, and they created this free cinema based on these two films, Mama Don't Allow and Every Day Except Christmas. And it was at this time that Tony Richardson and what's his name? The guy who wrote "Look Back in Anger," Osborne, John Osborne, were creating The Angry Young Man on the London stage, and Richardson was also creating these documentaries, and they came together, and with Rise and Anderson, created this movement of small, short films that became the proving ground for these larger feature films, which became known as the social realism or kitchen sink drama films. But Yassi wants me to always call free cinema, just because you like how free cinema sounds. Is that it, Yassi?
Exactly, because the kitchen sink drama, I think it's very downplayed how beautiful and deep these movies are. The social realism that they go, I agree that Italians, they know and they mastered this realism, this neorealism. I think Herbert can also agree with us about the Italian neorealism. But just compare this to the free cinema, to what Andre Bazin was trying to achieve in his realism. I'm comparing Lindsay Anderson to Andre Bazin because they're both come from this background of writing, film criticism, journalism, cinema journalism. How Bazin viewed
Yassi, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear her?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to put a link to the history of free cinema in the comments, so we don't have to dwell on
is
it too much.
closer to what do we call, like, neorealism, Italian neorealism. Now that we were talking about it, suddenly came to me, reminded me so much of Zeffirelli's Champ. Right? You know what I'm the with John Voight and Faye Dunaway.
Well,
you know,
except this movie is
il
good
campione.
because that was that to me was pathos, and that's something that I think that this film and the other films in this genre avoid that the Italians didn't, even the best of them. If you look at Vittorio De Sica, if you look at even Visconti's early neo-realist work, they really fall into pathos, into you have that kind of always have that Chaplin-esque scene where you feel sorry, for Umberto D sticks his hand out and somebody goes to give him a coin and he gets too proud and he pretends like he's checking to see if it's raining, type of scene. That what the English do with their typical stiff upper lip is they are able to show that realism using actors who maybe aren't professional in the background the same way that the neo-realists did, without having to have you feel sorry for the characters. And that's, I mean, especially most of these people are absolute assholes,
And
and
that's
even
bold. What a bold
yeah,
choice.
exactly. And they
You
don't
know?
feel the need. They don't feel the need to make you feel sorry for these people, to tug at your emotional. I mean, let's look at Rachel Roberts' performance here. This has my favorite kind of sex scene. The kind where that it starts out as a rape. And no, I'm kidding. It's my least favorite. It's a horrifying scene where he literally forces himself on her. And the only way that you know that she's in the end consented, even though she continues to fight it, is because she sends her child away. And then the next day we're supposed to be good with it because the past was a terrible, terrible, terrible time. And unfortunately, cinema of that era is littered with these scenes. But here, without Anderson moralizing about it, it is part of Frank's character that you've already built up kind of a resentment of him. So add rape to it, and he's become a horrifying monster, but he is the central protagonist of this film, and you have to use other means to get the audience to follow him without them being able to empathize with him. And part of that is what I spoke of earlier, that how Anderson shoots Harris and how much the camera absolutely just loves Harris, the same way Elia Kazan shot Brando and James Dean when they were playing not very likable characters. And so if you look at, say, Stanley Kowalski, who does the exact same thing at the end, a Streetcar Named Desire to Blanche, and actually create the mental illness. You have, though, this next day kind of acceptance of, okay, well, that happened, but then Rachel Roberts' character, who is just asking him to slow down because she has not recovered from the death of her husband, which probably was a suicide, and as someone whose twin brother committed suicide in 2014, I can empathize with her for that. But she is a cold character. She is not someone you're supposed to empathize or feel for, and you don't pick, but one of the better scenes in this film, and if you compare it to a similar scene in Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner, is when Frank and the kids take her to that pond, and they're playing with the soccer ball, and they're waiting, and there's something. It's in the music, it's in the way that it's shot, and what have you, that you are just, God, I hope something horrible doesn't happen to these people, despite the fact that pretty much except for the children, they're all assholes.
You see, because we always expect something bad to happen to women, but this is that's the trope. That's what we always expect. And that, how he used it here, in total contrast of what we used to know by then, by that time, that, yep, that this is the moment something's bad is going to happen to these kids, especially to that little girl. I love that, the way that they made that scene, and this, the stress they put on, and but that is exactly the moment that we start to kind of you were talking about Oppenheimer. I was thinking, when I was thinking about this, like this morning, reminded me, maybe because I watched The Killer last week, I was thinking what David Fincher is doing today is like to create to take this approach to the hitman, to the man that is normally depicted as a hero, as a champion. Oh yeah, this killer guy. But in Killer, there is nothing to like about this man. He kind of make this mundane character of a killer, of a hitman, and there's nothing to like about nothing to like about him. And I thought, to do this in 1963 is such a bold avant-garde move, And I was talking about Andre Bazin. Andre Bazin says that the cinema substitutes for a gaze a world more in harmony with our desires. And this is the gaze that I think is in harmony with our desires. We see, because, in movies today, what happens is that we see everything through this gaze of men, but in this film, the camera chooses deliberately to stay in Harris's face. We see, the way I said it, like the way the muscle in his face moves. The movie does not choose to sexualize the rape. The movie does not choose to sexualize even like the male nude figures. That's the realism. That the movie is so true to its genre and to its style. And I saw Sila came back. Sila, what do you think about the realism in the film? Do you still think, like, what do you think about it if you're back?
Yes, I'm back. Can you repeat the question? I'm trying to get the context of the question.
Oh yeah, of course. Eric had a question for you earlier.
I
but
was with customers. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. No, I think Eric, you had the question for Sila. Go ahead. No? Okay. So my question is, don't you think that the movie is so true to realism and the way that it shows this realism? And, to not sexualizing, because there is assault in the film. The movie has this very obvious theme of sex, homosexuality, the desire. It's obviously there. And it's something that Frank is struggling with, Mr. Weaver is struggling with, and it's said in the film through dialogues. Margaret says to Frank that that Johnson, that he ogles you. We see that. We see his desire for Margaret, how he wants him. We see the
Well, he says it. He says it. I want you. I want you.
Yeah. And then
he literally says it out loud.
Yeah, Mr. Weaver touches his thigh, and the movie wants us to feel that
Yes,
moment
yes.
because of the
Well,
close-up and everything.
before you get to
So
Sila, it's implied.
but
It's
it's not
implied that
sexualized.
it's implied that Mr. Reavers actually is okay with his wife sleeping with his players, and becomes angry with Frank because it's right after Frank turns his wife down that Mr. Reavers and Frank have a falling out. It's implied that because he rejected his wife, that he doesn't feel like he can control him anymore. So I mean, there's a very weird dynamic with that.
Yeah, and this is why in my experience, which is very young, almost every art piece needs to be perceived more than once. I don't think it's possible for any human being with the very fragile senses, with whichever thing might have occupied my mind in a particular 5 seconds watching the movie the first time, so I missed that particular 5 seconds that were important that I caught the second or third time around. I mean, this when you use the term realism, I cannot do anything with that because I really don't feel that I know the film enough. One time seeing this film, seeing the first, third, a second time shows me very clearly this film and many other films cannot be discussed when I have seen them only once. And but I'll try to comment on a couple of other things that I heard. For example, this when he, of course, there's the aspect of the camera or the director. Why do I decide to show him touching his leg or his knee? Once I show that angle or that situation, I could have. The story will go psychologically depending on which face I show first. Not after showing the knee, do I show him first or the driver first? And that will decide which way. So to me, that's a little bit. I cannot put that too much into perspective because I don't know. I understand. I do not understand the film enough to know what he's trying to say. Now, when I consider realism and this playfulness and this almost like big paintings of Rubens, not from women but from men playing in that pool. It's I don't know what to say about it, but it's impressive. It really says a lot without saying anything about the aspect that I'm going to show this tendency of sexuality, and I think it reminds me of another aspect of that was mentioned earlier today in the room. As soon as you are showing manhood, which is very much this film, rugby is very much about manhood. Playing, being in this bathtub is very much about a team, which is manhood, and at the same time, we are addressing the possibility of sensuality or possibly homosexuality. But as much as we try to reject homosexuality for many years, especially in the last 100 years, it is a part of manhood. So it is not really a contradiction to address homosexuality by showing manhood. And we see that very clearly in several films that we have watched. I mean, manhood and homosexuality belong together. The fact that I have a lot of that I'm afraid of becoming one or disgusted by it, that's my problem. It's not a it's not a problem of sensuality. It is my personal problem and my being afraid of either turning into one or I don't know, not knowing what could happen or trying to avoid what I really want. I mean,
Well,
you can go
and
in
you
so
made
many
this point.
directions.
You made this point about if last week, which is that when you
Yes, yes.
form bonds and relationships that are that tight, um, and I'm going to reverse this on you, but
Hopefully
just
not
because I do like a
homosexually.
good art. No, no, but I'm going to reverse this on you just for the sake of argument. But in this film, it's all about how Frank doesn't know how to behave, and the other players on the team do. So and there are hundreds of little scenes, but the big one obviously is when he takes Rachel Roberts out for dinner and he can't, and he just
That's crazy. That is so crazy.
yeah. But one of the things is Mrs. Reavers sleeps with her favorites of the players, and this is just accepted, and and this is Frank, but Frank just doesn't know how to behave because he is not part of this society. He's not part of this class. He is somebody who used to drill holes through Mr. Reaver's minds, whereas when you stick him in a jacket with a suit, he is still, he's still that big ape on the rugby field. Whereas when you observe the rest of the players, they understand and are part of this team. So they are part of this kind of this homosexual subtext. They know how to do it. They know how to deal with it. Frank can't deal with it because he's not part of that class that just kind of accepts this. And this goes back to what we were talking about with, and you specifically, Sila, were talking about with If, which is that they, that as Frank as the outsider because he can't come to terms with the relying on your teammates and behaving in society in a effete and less than manly manner because he is just pure man all the way through. He can't put it aside. He can't subordinate that part of him.
And that's what I think I mentioned at the beginning when I spoke. What I so much like about this character, or the way he's represented, or the way he's played by the actor, namely that he's not only immature, as I said before, he's not only brutal, but he's also very pure. I see him as such. He is so primitive that he's pure, and that's why I obviously I do not approve of that rape situation, but I think this rape has a lot to do with this purity. He has seen very clearly that she wants to, but he's not ready. But he's trying to help her to be ready, but because he's so immature, he doesn't know how to wait for her readiness. So he's not, and when he slaps her outside, the way I remember the first time I saw it, he doesn't show regret, but I think inside of him, he does.
He does in
think
his
he
face.
went too
He
far.
does in his face. It's in the performance. He doesn't say it out loud.
Correct,
But you feel
the
it.
body language is there.
Like
And
I've
the
done.
same
Oh
thing
my
with
God!
the,
I'm just a big ape.
yes,
Is what
and
it
the
what it
same
said. What
thing
his
with the,
face says.
and the same with rejecting Weaver's wife. He he is too pure. He's really pure, and he knows in this purity that he cannot betray something he's striving for, which is Rachel, whatever her name is, her landlady, his landlady. I really see the whole.
Margaret's the character's name, but Rachel Roberts is the actress.
Yeah,
We can refer to her as both.
yeah. I
We
don't have
as
the
long as we
names
know
straight.
as long as we know who you're talking about, it's fine.
Yeah. So for me, that in terms of realism, the way I would read it, I would say that aspect, which I find very interesting. I think it's shown twice, the way the men play in the bathtub like little boys, but they're very tough men, which
But that's
would
another scene where Frank doesn't know how to behave because
correct. He's never
they
there, right?
no,
He's
he
never
is.
inside.
He's in that bathtub. He's in that
Oh, okay.
bathtub, and he plays too rough, and that's why they have to end it. And they end up
Okay. Yeah.
turning the hose.
Okay.
Turning the hose on him because they're being all playful and what have you, and he's still out on the rugby field. But whereas the rest of the players are able to be, the big apes out on the rugby fields, but live their lives, he is still playing too rough when he leaves, and that's why he, and it ends in tragedy. And in my mind, in my reading of this film, it's what causes Rachel Roberts' character to die of a brain aneurysm, because all he has done is just stress the people he's trying to help out so much in his life, because he's just a big ape.
Now, you went into the scene in the lake, and you were talking about the suspense that something bad is going to happen. I think I got that same feeling, but what I found interesting, which I think is also very typical in films, through that tension, the actress opens up. At least if I remember correctly, that makes her up and up. For some strange reason, she just feels, okay, this feels like something real nice, and we're playing here together, even though we have nothing to do with each other, but somehow. And the thing is that she has seen again and again and again that he's trying to do his best. He's not really doing anything bad. And he even says to her, when she kind of reaches a certain point and say, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that to you, and maybe I shouldn't have done that. And he keeps saying, no, it's okay, it's okay. He is actually saying repeatedly to her in many ways and in many actions, be who you are, but please don't keep rejecting me, because I know you want me. And I don't know, I really have to see this complete film another time.
No, because you picked up on it perfectly there. I think
No, Sila, that's what I
you
said. Before you entered the room, right at the beginning, I told Eric, I said, I've been thinking about this film for 2 weeks, and I still couldn't figure out all the layers that are there. Not this and not,
Yes,
I
yes,
mean, you're not alone in
yeah.
this. I totally agree. Me too. I don't feel like I totally grasp everything that was there.
Well, I'm going to put a link in the comments to a film that Lindsay Anderson made for American Film Theater, of a David Story play, because he and David Story worked together on stage 8 times. So the people who kind of want to get an idea of the majority of Anderson's career, because obviously he only made the 5 feature films, can kind of get an idea of what his stage work was like, because the things that you're talking about are not things that you can find in a screenplay or even a performance. That is, when we talk about the director as auteur, that is something that only Anderson can bring out in his shot selection, in the way that he coaches the performances, and in the way that we hear the dialogue. Because of course you could shoot that scene and say, like a Tony Richardson in a comparable scene in Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, Yassi has seen. They go to a beach. They take a train holiday to the beach, and it's a very similar scene, but you don't have that sense that something is going to happen. You don't have that tension, but it's little things. The oboe music, for instance, heightens that, which is kind of jazzy all the way through, but there becomes very forlorn, but it's not like some horror film music cue. It's subtle, but it's there, and it's in how Anderson holds on the shots just a little bit extra longer, because you're waiting for something to happen in that shot, and that long distance shot from that perfect example of a Lindsay Anderson high angle of him wading into the water with Margaret's daughter on his shoulders. you're at the edge of your seat, like you're watching Jaws, or I was, the first time, and then again recently when I watched this 3 weeks ago, and that is something only uh, somebody with this kind of experience bringing material to life can give a second layer to, I think. But do check out In Celebration. It's also an excellent play by David Story, and has a great performance by Brian Cox, who is now known for Secession and was the original Hannibal Lecter, and it made Alan Bates's stage career after he had stopped getting a lot of the big movie parts. But the links in the comments.
And there is something like none of I was trying to say about the gays and the how this movie, like what we can see, like this, the assault, the sexual relationships and everything, the, in this very, as Sila said, this very masculine environment, when men with traumas are normally seen as feminine. They're not empowered. There is this, in another like similar movie, I can say, like in Mysterious Skin, the very, very young Joseph Gordon-Levitt, they've been assaulted by their coach, molested by their coach, and the way that how the movie decides to depict that here. I think this is kind of like Lazarus Comfort Rescue fantasy that he develops for Margaret. This kind of his aggression, his masculinity, his personality. He gets aroused by her resistance. And because we see when Mrs. Waver tries to approach him, and praise his beauty, praises his physics, praises his masculinity.
She's too easy. She's too easy. It's too easy.
Yeah,
He's used
it's too easy for him.
He's used to fighting on the rugby field and having to fight for every inch. And so if you don't fight him, then
exactly,
then there's no desire there.
You see, this is
but
kind of
I do
limerence.
want to say that from a modern perspective, that rape scene is completely unacceptable. It is completely unacceptable to have that in that film the way it is, because it does. The very next scene, she's just shown making dinner as if nothing had happened.
But what happens here is that the movie is not the movie is not like Last Tango in Paris. It doesn't sexualize that. It shows,
absolutely not.
It
Absolutely
emphasizes
not.
the
But
horror.
I just do want to stress that and I say it about young Frankenstein. The uptight socialite loosened up by somebody finally breaking through as rape has caused so much damage in society that we have to call it out when we observe it, even when we're dealing with a film that we love by a director that we love.
That is my kind of that is my difficulty with that scene, the way I remember it the first time, because the second time I saw it, I didn't get to that point. But that is my situation with that situation, that it cannot be judged from one angle alone.
Now, if they had drawn a direct line from that scene to her death, and the amount of stress that particular thing had causing her brain hemorrhage, then that scene is excusable, because you are actually putting it into context, because your anti-hero being a rapist is not something that I disallow. I'm not saying that you cannot have video, but to show it consequence free the way that the film does is beneath, I think, Anderson. And, you know, is but unfortunately we can't go back in time and change everyone's mores, you know, because, and like I said, even Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein has this scene in it, you know, which and it, we what we but I will say this in the film's defense, having seen this film several times but not having seen it in say 15 years, I had forgotten it was in that. And what does that tell you about my evolution as a viewer about scenes like that, which says that if I look back at myself, there's something to judge. Because if I had forgotten it was there, it can't have bothered me that much, in my many viewings since 1985 of this, so I have changed just as times have.
You know what I really like is that, you know, this obsession, I can say, you know, the centerpiece of the story, when we talked about it, it's not rugby, it's what it is that, I mean, how this relationship between Frank and Margaret is shown, is depicted. I think it's like why Achilles healed towards this woman. You know, it's not about sex. It's not about social grace. It's, you know, she, you know, I think she, like what Sila said, is important about that lake scene, or the wedding scene. After, you know, maybe she submits to sex with him like grudgingly, but from the social aspect of everything, you know, I think she is the only person that tells to his face th- what he really was, what he really is, you know, that 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 kind of
Well,
honesty that comes.
but that's not what really hurts him. What hurts him is when she says, "We don't need you," later on. And that is when finally he's been cut, because he needs to be needed.
That's a very good point because I keep thinking about the calling this person dad. He is very needy. He has no one. As far as I could tell from the film, he has no one. He likes the kids like him, the woman likes him, the dad, who's not his dad, likes him. Actually, everybody likes him, but he has no one. And even when the Mrs. Harvey shows affection, he rejects her because he's in need of a real, primitive, pure connection to himself.
Well, and Dad is too easy. There's no conquest there, the way there is
Yeah,
with
yeah.
the Rachel Roberts Margaret. He hasn't earned
Well,
it,
okay,
which
yeah,
goes back to your very brilliant purity point, Scylla.
but also consider what you just said. Don't forget that dad does not want to take his money, which is, in my view, in this context, also a problem. He needs his dad or this person who he appreciates to take his money. He feels rejected when he doesn't want to take it. I mean, this guy is screaming from support on the most primitive sense.
That's so Freudian, you know, that this the rectify the rejection, you know, that he this so yeah,
Yeah.
you know, this that it's there, he, you know, his ego, that he needs his ego to be fed, obviously.
Yeah, I'm not going to
No.
deny that, but I think it's
Uh-huh.
more general than that. He wants to go for a walk with her, and she says, "For what? Please see the game, the match. Please come and see the match." And she says, "For what?" He needs. I don't think so much for his ego, but the way
Well,
he lies down on
he's
bed and he
put
starts
himself
watching the check.
he's put himself in competition with her dead husband. So
Okay.
he cannot compete with a ghost, and he cannot compete with
Yes,
a
but
ghost.
Eric, he has also seen that
Oh.
she, at some point, she puts the boots away. So she's been also giving him signs that she's moving in his direction.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm talking about from his inside mind. So when he gets the
But
check for $1,000 and shows it to her, the first thing that she says is, "Well, that's more than they gave me after
Yeah, yeah.
because her husband died on the job." And that's what drives him into a rage because he's in competition with a dead man all the way through, you know. And but at the end, when he reveals to her that he knows that he actually committed suicide on the job, and and implies that she drove him to it, I think there's more to that scene than just hurtful words or saying something.
Yes, yes. Because
I think
she also wants to hear more. Okay, and what else did they tell you? There's a very interesting excessiveness of want on both sides, but they are incapable of reaching together.
and this it's those scenes that lift this above melodrama, above the soap opera kind of, if you were to just read a plot summary of this, you might think this was just kind of a soap opera about rugby, but it's these types of things, these conversations that you can't have that lift this above, melodrama. And I hate to put it this way because I don't really think of this as being a sports film, but when you look at great films that have sports at their center, such as this, Raging Bull, I would put Chariots of Fire in there. Um, uh, that generally, as a rule, the sports, as Yassi has said, take a backstage. But this is the only one of those where I can think of where his profession as a rugby player informs every scene of this because he is, whether he's on the rugby field or in humanity, he's acting as a rugby player. He is simply trying to advance the ball scene after scene after scene, and he's just knocking everybody about. And uh, and in a sense, it's like the second half of Raging Bull with Jake LaMotta. He doesn't know how to live without boxing. Well, he can't. When he's not on the rugby field, when he's not, he just does not know how to behave. He is, to coin a phrase, a raging bull.
none of the relationships in the film is like as norm. Nothing. We see any kind of the relationship. Normally in sports film, we see this team spirit. We don't see team spirit here. It's alienation, it's individualism. There's nothing ever said about a team,
which
you
which is a
know?
flaw of the film if you compare it to, and I'm never one of these people who says that a film has to be exactly like the book that it's based on, but if you compare, what the book handles better is you get the sense that because he demanded the $1,000, he's alienated himself from his teammates, and so they don't really consider him part of the team in the book because of the £1,000. I'm sorry, which, if you adjust for inflation, is almost enough for a ticket to see Taylor Swift live in concert. But uh, and the film doesn't handle that as well, and leaves the remnants of it. But there's just enough of it, I think, that you do sense that if it isn't the money, that it's something that's keeping, that his teammates are a team, but he's not a part of that team.
So, I think that's why it's so important that at the beginning I asked you to let's talk about uh, David's story and David's story, because that I think plays a very important, that's kind of like biopic to him. They said it's more of his film than Lindsay Anderson's film
But
because of
this
his
isn't an
splits.
autobiography. But this isn't an
It's
autobiography.
not
It's his
it's not at
observations.
all.
He was an art
Yeah.
student who was using rugby
Yes.
to get through art school. This was his observation of other people. So the dad character, for instance, was a typical character that shows up around rugby fields, and they do tend to be forlorn, celibate homosexuals. So the notion of the forlorn celibate homosexual relationship was something that he came up with from real life observation. We're going to talk about story again because we are going to do eventually Saturday night and Sunday morning, and we are going to do Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner. Despite the fact that I don't think they're as good as this film, I still think they're excellent films. I just think this one is
But
head and shoulders
but what
above them.
what about him I think is important here is that his split life, that when he was at art school, his artist friends was telling him that no, you're just a dumb rugby player. When a moron rugby player. When he was in like with the rugby team, they were telling him like, yeah, you're the sassy gay guy, gay artist. So he didn't belong. And I think the problem with Frank, his he is struggling because he wants to belong somewhere. And that house, that the woman gives him that sense of belonging, that family that he seeks, that comfort. Because he doesn't want to go back to the cold, and that's the social aspect of the film, that a man that wants, all the man at that period of time, that they wanted to be part of the like higher society, from the
Well,
economic
and yeah,
point of
this is a
view.
film about class. This is a film about class. Now, and I do hope you guys take a chance to take a look at In Celebration. Like I say, it's not a film; it's more than just a film stage play. So it's not something that we're going to discuss here. But I will point out that when it comes to your point about class, that if you remember the Monty Python sketch about the guy who works down at the mill whose parents are both playwrights, that's a joke on David Story's typical plays. Where it's of course the opposite. I worked down at the mill. My dad worked down at the mill. His dad worked down at the mill, and you want to go off to London and be a fancy playwright. That's your David story, and that's David Story's life story.
The four Yorkshiremen, right? That one, that's
No,
amazing. No,
no,
I
no,
thought
no.
that.
No,
I don't
that sketch
know.
too, but no, but there's trouble down at the mill, and the joke is that they have the David Story character comes home from working at the mill. His parents are both playwrights, and they're embarrassed of him because he's not a playwright. Which is the reverse of what a David Story typical play is, which is his autobiography, which is his parents both worked down at the mill, and he wanted to be a playwright, and they were like, "No, the mill's not good enough for you." And that's your typical. I mean, when people want to kind of put David Story in a box, that's the box that they put him in. But it became such a social phenomenon that Monty Python could just reference it briefly in a sketch, and everyone knew what they were talking about. So the opening of the Spanish Inquisition scene sketch starts with Graham Chapman walking in and saying, "There's trouble down at the mill," and everybody knew, oh yeah, that's a David Story. So that's how important David Story became to the London stage.
Okay, good. I found the sketch on YouTube. I put it in the links. Yeah, yeah, the Spanish Inquisition. Now I remember that. That's so funny. Yeah, so
down at the
see
mill.
the problems down in the middle. So you see that I think, and now, going back to the, I think something else that you guys were talking about before in the middle of the conversation, you were talking about him, Frank, referring to himself as an ape. That's what I found really fascinating on those savage rugby scenes. That they were presented as, like, now that we're talking about class, they, to me, they look so much like gladiators in the mud, and how, like, the higher society, they look at them, and and they get their teeth knocked out of their mouth, they got their body destroyed, and speaking of a director's power of prophecy and see the future. I know you don't like to talk about that aspect of If, but just look at Lindsay Anderson's and how he, like, foreseen everything that is coming, like this CTE and the mental problems with football players and the school shootings and all that. I think that man was a visionary, how he saw this corruption in the sports, and this hierarchy in the sports, and how men are treated as animals of sorts to our for our entertainment, kind of. That's so savage of sort, I think that he knew, he had this vision of future to come, and that's what I found it really fascinating about these two movies that we watched.
And it is interesting. Now, he is Anderson is somebody who refers to his audience constantly as being a Philistine. That's his favorite word. Like the British audience is Philistine. There's nothing we can do about it. That's why I can't make movies anymore, because the audience is just too Philistine. And it is interesting because it opens him up to the attack that these types of films are the English upper middle class yelling about the working class, which is something that great friend of the wall and Pink Floyd director, great friend of the show and Pink Floyd director. His name's escaping me now.
Alan Parker.
Alan Parker.
Alan Parker points out in the Turnip's Head to Guide to British Film, is that the reason these films did not do well financially, except for Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, was because the working class didn't go to see them. They did not like them. They didn't like how they were portrayed in them, and they felt like it was the middle class judging them, which is very, very interesting.
If I remember correctly, I recall someone saying that rugby is the gentleman's game. Is that correct?
He was being ironic.
Well, there's something about manhood, togetherness, the way they play that sport, the way they hug each other. I'm sorry, I have a customer.
No, and I'll continue Sila's point. But it is also interesting that rugby is not referred to as rugby in this film. It's referred to as football. And what the English refer to football is referred to here as soccer. And that's an up north thing.
Oh, I thought it was for the American audience to understand it.
Nope, that's an up north thing. That's just because it depends on, rugby is so much more popular up north where the working class lives, and soccer is the gentleman's game that's played by the Kentish and the Londoners and all of that. But and rugby is
that's so interesting.
Rugby is like American football without pads, without helmets, and your job is to knock the teeth out of the person in front of you. I mean, it is the roughest of it is, unless they legalize dueling again. It's the roughest of sports. It's just the most violent of all sports. And
But
yeah,
you see, everything is so raw in the film. You see, the rape scene is raw. The relationship between these people is
well, and
raw. The
the rape
emotions are
scene,
raw. And
the rape scene is wrong because it is about violence in the film.
no, I mean raw. RAW, like
Raw. Oh,
so,
raw.
raw,
By
raw.
raw, I think you're gonna say you're yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. Raw. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and that's why I think rugby is a good choice to it. That is because that's like kind of
It's
football,
about violence.
American
It's
football,
about violence.
and but raw and violence.
And
Raw and violent.
and when Frank isn't being physically violent, as he is on the rugby field, and when he slaps her, and when he basically rapes her, he is being verbally violent, which is something that goes through the angry young men, and that's why we're not going to discuss the look back in anger that Tony Richardson made with Richard Burton, is because the verbal violence in that film, because of Richard Burton's performance, makes that film, to me, just it's not great or classical in this, the way the Entertainer is, and the way this film, and Saturday Night Sunday Morning, and there are 10 films that we're going to discuss of this, and Saturday Night Sunday Morning, Loneliness, The Long Distance Runner, and A Taste of Honey are all going to be part of them, and I am going to talk about them as masterpieces, which they are. But this is the better of those films, because unlike those other directors, Anderson gets that this is about violence, whereas the other directors don't. I don't think. But everything that Frank does is about violence. Everything that comes out of his mouth, it's bile. It is pure bile. The way he tells her that he loves her is complete bile. He is incapable of doing anything without violence.
And it's genuine. That's what I said at the beginning when I was talking about. I said the this passion, you know, uh, this and it's all results of this social violence.
And
I
the
think it's all
acting,
the
but the
response.
performances pull it out too, and because everybody is cast, I think, perfectly. Even Edward Fox
Perfectly.
has a bit. Saturday and Sunday Morning has, I think, a from David Story's point of view, a better story in which Jack, who is who is played by Brian Pringle in the film. Uh, the ending of it is that Albert Finney has impregnated his wife. Jack is basically going to raise Albert Finney's child with his wife, because he's forgiven her and taken her home. And he sits down and starts to talk to Albert Finney after he's and his brother has had a bunch of hoodlums beat him up for doing this, as if nothing had happened. And the ending line is something to the effect of, "You take care of yourself, okay?" Uh, which tells you everything that you need to know about that character. But in the film version, Brian Pringle plays him as if he's from another movie from everyone else that's in the film. He looks like he is a holdover from, like, I'm All Right, Jack, or one of the Carry On films. You know, uh, and there's none of that in this film. Everybody looks and acts and talks perfectly for their role, and you couldn't picture anyone else in them.
I want to get out of topic for 2 seconds because many weeks ago, when you had problems with Clubhouse, you wanted to ask that trivia question. And I have the answer for the trivia question. for A Man for All Seasons.
Who was the man for all seasons of the title?
More. And the reason is because I could even read it to you if I get my computer. The real Moore has an acquaintance. They're not friends, but I think his name is Wilmington, and he speaks about Moore, about his character, about what type of person he is, and in that description, he concludes with that, a man for all season. He's referring to his ability to do different things. So he's referring to Moore himself. What do I win for that?
He wrote that 20 years before Moore's death, though.
Okay, well then I'll read it to you. 1 second.
Oh, I have it. I
Oh,
quoted
okay.
it when we did it. But I think Richard Rich is the man for all seasons, because the man for all seasons is who survives the longest,
No,
and
no,
it's
no,
not
no,
Moore.
no, no.
Wait.
No,
Now
no,
that
no.
we're off topic, I have another question. I have a question for Eric and Sila. Now that Sila, you work on Sundays, do you also work Saturdays? Because it seems like there is no more understanding movie rooms. So just because you are our
I'm going to
part.
interrupt it. No, they've got one next Saturday. They're doing because I get their telegram. So
Big Sleep. They're doing Big
Well, to
doing
Sleep.
Big
your
No,
Sleep next
because I
Saturday.
wanted to do a more convenient hour for Sila so that he won't
well
be at
to your
work.
no to your to answer your question, I usually do not work Sundays. I work every Saturday unless I'm on vacation. But a couple of times when the owner is away on Sundays, then I work, and that's the case today. But usually I do not work Sundays.
Oh, okay. So this is a good time for you, generally, in
Yes,
general.
yes.
Okay.
And as you see from work, if I'm doing a room when I'm having a discussion, I cannot do it while I work. But I did a room today because I knew it was only playing music. And if I'm not in charge of the room, I can do it like today with you guys because I'm not in
Yeah,
charge. I can
we're
work in
we're
and out.
we're just we're just glad to have you. However, we get you.
Thank you, thank you.
Exactly.
I enjoy very much doing these rooms
And
with you.
it's great. It's great. It's great that Yassi said that, because that's a great way to kind of end this up. So we're gonna do Oppenheimer next week. If anybody needs a link to the film, I do have a link to the film that's slightly sketchy.
Yes,
Oh,
but before you end, I want to read that because I don't think you have this what I'm talking about.
Go
oh,
ahead,
I
please.
can read it to you too. I have it in my notes. But go
Yes,
ahead.
but it cannot be the same because you're concluding something different, which does not make sense with what I'm concluding from my text. So I don't think we have the same text.
Interesting.
It
Go
is.
ahead. Go ahead.
It
Please,
is.
So
please,
so,
please.
okay. This explains in my head very clearly who is a man for all seasons.
Moore is a man
Playwright.
of angel's wit and singular learning. I know not his fellow, for where is the man of that gentleness, lowliness, and affability? And as time requireth, a man of marvelous mirth and pastimes, and sometimes as sad gravity, a man for all seasons. Robert Whittington, 1520.
Yes. So he's referring to the character of Moore. He's referring to more. It doesn't have anything to do with his death. He's referring to how good of a man he was. He was so good that he was good for all seasons.
I still think Robert Bolt used that quote as the title ironically, because of the ending of, and I guess unfortunately, because of the technical problems, you didn't get to hear the difference between the play and the film. But at the end of the play, which is not included in the film, you actually have it spelled out for you that that the men for all seasons were the people who stuck around, took care of their families, lived and survived through not only Henry VIII's reign, but Mary's reign and Elizabeth's reign, and all the religious Reformation and Counter Reformation that went on. And so it was Matthew, his servant in the play, and Richard Rich are the only two who actually did that because the play implies they loved their family enough to not risk martyrdom for them.
So you're talking about Bolt,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the statement is from
right.
Whittington.
The statement is from Whittington. I think Bolt is using it ironically. Now that's a discussion to have, and it was meant as a debate. It was not meant to be everyone must agree with me. You are just as right as I am on that, but that's my side of it. That's why it wasn't a trivia question. It was something to create a debate. It was something to give us something to think about and talk about. I like a good fight.
So,
I got.
question for Sila. Question for Sila. Sila, the score of this film, and also Eric, a very atonal kind of modern new age jazz.
Lot of oboe.
What?
Lot of oboe.
And at the end, the ending scene. Before we go, we have to talk about that very.
Okay, I'm just gonna
visceral.
say, I thought the music for that ending scene, however you want to look at tonally or how it fits the scene of the film or what have you, it was just bad. I just thought it was not very good. I didn't think it was very well
But I
composed.
really liked it.
But it does fit the scene very well. But Sila has kind of ruined me because I always think in the back of my head now when I hear a music score, that scene probably would have been better without it. And that's another one of those scenes where I think it would have been better if you'd had sound effects, maybe nurses coming in and out, or maybe you heard the wheels, or a wheelchair or something like that, as opposed to that particular oboe. See, I just thought that was not good music, quite honestly. Matter of fact, it was so atonal. It was to me, it was almost the opposite of music, and that also that oboe was reaching notes that were too deep for its instrument, and it had like 5 different key changes that made it overly complicated for no particular reason. So no, I can't agree with you on that, Yassi.
I think you have caught a virus from probably a Sila virus.
But it is true that
but
they put too much music into films. They really do.
I think that's also courageous and brilliant, but because that's the avant-garde way that they narrate this story, the way that they pick, this unconventional way to narrate the story. The music also plays to that. The use of percussions. That creates that tension. That's so I found it really good, especially in the rugby scenes. Why are you saying that, guys? It was so good. To the nature, his Frank's mental state, especially at the ending of the film.
I will give you the rugby scene. I will give you the rugby scene, but that's because the music was good for the rugby scene. It was well composed, and it was subtle, and it was soft. It was soft. You could still hear other things. You could still hear the men. You could still hear the cleats on the grass and the things like that. And that, to me, and that was good use of music because I didn't really notice it at first. It crept up on me. The ending scene, it was too much sound of music and not enough of what was going on in the room. And again, Scylla might have ruined me because now that's all I ever think about when I see a scene.
Yeah, Sila, you ruined us.
Sorry.
What are you gonna say about yourself?
No, I will make it more difficult with what I'm going to say now. The way everybody perceives has a lot. And this is just my opinion. The way everybody perceives, especially the music, has a lot to do with the the world or the universe of the individual. What is the need for a soft thing to happen while something else is happening? How? So that's the impression I get from Yassi. She likes the music, so she accepts it because she likes the music. And Eric is dealing with how well they must go together. So those are two views there. And then my view, the third one would be, I just don't think that music should be background. And for example, when we
Well, and most of the music in this film is didactic music. It doesn't have a lot of score in it. Most of it comes either in the club scenes or from car radios and things like that, which makes it more noticeable when it is. And like I said, on the rugby scenes, I think it's actually done very, very well. But I think in that ending scene, if it were better music, I might have an argument with you. But I just think it hit my ears badly. And it's dated too. It dates the film because it's that soft kind of jazz that we get stuck listening to on hold or when we are in an elevator. It's just not good.
Because it's Frank's state of mind. He's stuck of sort. Don't you think? That's it has
I will give you that. I will give you that. I will give you that. That particular the oboe score does give you that or that was at least the intention, and it worked for me almost all the way through the film until that ending scene. So I will give you that. I do see it, and I think, and I can see where if you weren't immediately turned off by the music, maybe you'd say, hey, actually that was kind of brilliant how they used that. But
I was away.
But I think Bergman would have done it better. I think with which I can't say about the rest of the film. I think the rest of the film, you would compare with any great director, Antonioni, Sagitt Ray, Akira Kurosawa, Yasushi Oza, wouldn't have done a better job with any other scene in the film. And so that's going to be my ending note on this. We're going to wrap this room up. Let's get a once around. Final thoughts, Yassi?
I just want to say one more thing about the spider, and the spider symbolism, if you may. I think because we kind of enter this dream realm, and for the Native Americans, the spider kind of symbolizes this gateway between the world, the state of waking and dream. And they believe that the symbolism of spider is like, it's like your consciousness speaking to you, and that web that it weaves, it's kind of like you can revive your destiny, your fate, and I think that, and the way that he crushes that, it's his desperation, his, because spider, that web that it weaves, it has a pattern, and there's a rhythm to it. And this man, this broken man, especially at the ending scene, that like he's walking in that labyrinth, that house that is so familiar to him, became empty without Margaret. And, he's so lost that he's like out of balance. And, out of, I think that was so well done. And I'm not a fan of slow motion or dissolves or not like that, but how they're used, these techniques, this film techniques, when they're well used, I always say it, it's beautiful when they know how to use it, not turn it into corny and cheesy, and symbolism. When symbolism is so on the nose, it's imposing. It's like the directors, lazy writing, but it's not happening here. But with all these things that can be so kitsch and corny and cheesy, that's what I really appreciate about these films, because I don't know, and it's when the technique is used well, they can say a lot. And something else, because we talked about Peter Greenaway a lot, you know, we talk about how Peter Greenaway liked these word games and the alphabet games and coding and codes and everything. uh, when we talked about if and ellipses, which is not ellipses, I wrote that there are four dots. So that also, like, uh, and the way that Peter Greenaway, you know, has this, I don't know how to say it, like, uh, this how he tries to uh, do this social commentary and says his words, uh, what he wants, under this layers and very subtle and more. The movie looks very formalistic at the first view, but there is this story and tone and something beneath. I think he is a very good, he inherited from these people, from the free cinema movement, you know, and they they knew it. He's a very, and he's not the prodigal son. He's a very good son and heir to this cinema. That's what I wanted to say. When he, this self-destruction aspect that Peter Greenaway likes so much in his films. There are in If, there were in If, there were here in this film, and this lost people, this lost, the Margaret, she might like Frank, but she has to hold back because of this judging eye of society. She cares about what people say, because of their age difference, because of her lost husband, whatever she does. Oh, and something that we talked about in Tommy, when we were talking about Tommy, that those factories that they used to make, uh, it says here, help me here, Eric, those factories that women used to work during the war, that in Tommy ends up to be those bullets that they made, they become the pinball, the ball for the pinball. And Margaret also talks about it here. She says, I used to work on one of these factories. You see, these women were pillars of this society when men were at war. But now, again, they're treated as widows, as, the second class citizens, and they're looked at as with judgmental eyes, you know. And Frank, he wants to find himself in the society. He can't, he's struggling, all that, I think. And these things are not on the nose, they're not imposed. Even the violence in the film, he's not, you know, I love John Ford. I love all these people that uh, Lindsay Anderson really, the American cinema that he really appreciated. But I can say that he did the violence that he used is better than Ford, to be honest. I think there's an artistic view to it. There is something to these, as Sila said, they beg for rewatch. You want to go back to discover more from these films. And that's what I really appreciated about them.
Scylla, final thoughts?
Can I say
Um,
something?
but no, I really thank you for putting this film in my way. I will have to conclude it And I really enjoyed it. I really liked the film. I really want to understand. For example, this thing with the spider. That I said at the beginning of the room that I think this film is not experimental, but the spider situation makes it very experimental in my observation, because we're trying to understand what is he trying to tell us, what is the connection, what is the symbolism. It is very clear that there's some symbolism, and the way he kills the spider is, I think, what it contributes to this aspect that I get from surrealism, the way he does that. But I enjoyed the film very much, and I will watch it again until the end, and maybe another time. Thank you.
One more thing I say about the sexual assault and the representation of women, how, because the movie can represent the assault as in a sexual way. I said it before and I repeat. But what happens here is Anderson emphasizes on the horror and how what happened to this woman, that this pressures, all these traumas and pressures coming from economic aspect, social aspect, rape, kids, all that, how they mentally and emotionally drained her. I really liked the portraits of women and the different classes, how Mrs. Weaver has this power to choose the man she likes, but Margaret is can't do it because of this hierarchy and because of this masculine power and authority of men, like men seeking power, and how this hierarchy also affects a man, like the mental abuse of Frank of Sword, and how he pushed them on the woman that he found. I think that is what happens in this movie, because the representation is so important when it gets to, what different ways that assault can manifest in cinema, and this cycle here is so subtle, so well done. That's it.
That's terrific. So next week we're going to do Oppenheimer. Like I said, if it's available for streaming, if you have Amazon and all of that. Otherwise, back channel me, and I'll send you a link to a slightly sketchy, but perfectly beautiful print of it. I'm going to end this with a quote from David's story that I thought of this time while watching the film, and when he said that the essence of true friendship is to make allowances for another's little lapses. Have confidence that if you have done a little thing well, you can do a bigger thing well too. I don't enjoy getting knocked about on a football field for other people's amusement. I enjoy it if I'm being paid a lot for it, which I think is the difference between David's story and his character Frank. Well, and on that note, we'll see you next week for Oppenheimer. I'm going to repeat my joke because Herbert and Sila weren't here. Christopher Nolan to me is like Thai food. At first, it is something that I ate because I was curious, and now it is simply self-harm. So on that note, we'll see you next week, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Unless Herbert had anything. Okay, good. Goodbye, everybody. Want to join the conversation? We're at the Clubhouse app every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just look for the room called UK Cinema History every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you can join us.